A-D-N.
It's HeadphonesNeil!
What's up, guys, and welcome back to HeadphonesNeil Reviews. After a couple of weeks off while I was on vacation, in case you hadn't noticed, there hadn't been a couple of podcast episodes. Didn't do a proper review for Star Wars Jedi Survivor and all of that stuff. So I kind of wanted to keep it on the down low, but now that I'm back from vacation, I thought I would do a bulk catch-up episode. I originally was planning on saving this episode for the end of August and getting back to the schedule from next week, but I had a bit of time to get everything together while I was on vacation, so I can get the episode out today, which I'll jump into when I get to that particular review at the end of the episode. So to round out some of the stuff, or to start it off with some of the stuff that I had a chance to watch, I did have a chance to watch Eyes of Wakanda on Disney+. It's only a few episodes as far as providing some backstory and context to the War Dogs. So we do get some of that in the second, or actually it was probably the first Black Panther movie, where we have Chadwick's Black Panther going up against Michael B. Jordan, and all of that and the story of the War Dogs there, but we don't have much context for the history of them. So Eyes of Wakanda actually provides that as far as what they're doing, what their purpose is, how you get into and recruited for that particular program by Wakanda to begin with. And it is actually, according to this, an actual branch of Wakanda where they want to keep their eyes and ears out in the real world for what's going on, and kind of keep their eyes out open for what's going on in the real world. So it's kind of like a CIA, MI6, MI5, whatever the British version is, but essentially their spy subversion agency to keep their eyes and ears out on the world. Even though they can do it from their own systems, they want to be in the real world to keep their ears to the ground and find out what's going on. So I thought it was very well done. Even though they're relatively short, they are not short, not long, but it's easy to get through because it is that entertaining and that informative. The sound and visual styles are very well done, so I definitely recommend watching them. On a not quite related note, for some reason just lately I've been wanting to rewatch Underworld, so I did have a chance to rewatch the first one to see how it holds up. I haven't had a chance to watch the rest of the franchise, but I do have it queued up to want to do sooner or later just to see how it holds up. But for me, the first one holds up well enough to the point where it introduces us to Selene the vampire, her kind of tenuous position within her own coven, why she's, or sort of introduced the reasons for why she's the favorite for the elder vampire. And I always mix up Victor and Marcus, but the one that ends up dying in the film, because I think that's Victor, and then Marcus is the one who they awaken for the next film. So that's kind of why I want to rewatch the rest of the films to get the backstory of how she became a vampire and recruited, the backstory and all of that, because I think the second one or the third one takes us to the original fight between the vampires and the Lycans or the werewolves or whatever, and then the continuing story of Selene and all of that. I think the second one is Selene continuing to work with the vampires and the vampire guy that she saves, and then the third one is the Rise of the Lycans or something like that, where that's where we learn about the backstory of the original feud. So all in all, a good film. Enjoyed the kind of dark tone, blue tone feel to all of it. It was themed very well and all of that. Music was okay, not very memorable to me, but the rest of the story was interesting and entertaining enough to the point where I enjoyed the film even now. So for me, that the film holds up. If you liked it originally or like the vampire genre, then definitely recommend giving it a watch. And at some point, I probably plan to watch the rest of the films again as well. I also had a chance to watch Wednesday Season 2 Part 1 with the second part, I think, coming in August or in September, I think. September, October, something like that before the start of the Stranger Things final season. And overall, it was a good start to the season. It kind of still carries over from the end of the first season. We're coming back to school. Wednesday's mom is kind of curious and thrilled that she wants to go back to school. We catch up with all the different characters. So her parents, Pugsley is now going to the school, her brother, and then we meet up with her roommate and all the various characters we met in the first season. Wednesday's now a star in the school, even though she doesn't want to be, so she has to deal with that and her own personality, and then also trying to figure out some new stuff that's going on at the school and who's spying on her and trying to undermine everything that she's doing. So they do a lot in these first few episodes, and I do recommend giving it a watch. They do a twofold thing very well, where they not only reintroduce us to what was going on in the last season, which you do need to have the full context of what they're doing, but they also introduce a new story to set up the second half of the season. So while I don't necessarily like that they're doing this in two parts, I mean, it all depends on how the second half flows for me to make a decision on it. But while I would prefer that they would have released it all at once, it feels like they are setting it up that they don't want the second half of the season to be distracted by the first half being a recap of the first season and also trying to set up what's happening in the second one. So these first few episodes kind of get that out of the way, and then we're going to get into the second half of the second season. So we'll see how all of that plays itself out. So with that being said, as far as the next couple of things that we do have, or I'm going to go through some of the gameplays that I've been working on. So I did have a chance to finish Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I did play that via Xbox Gamepass on my Android smartphone, using the Razer Kishi. Overall, it played very well. I think I had a couple of random hiccups along the way, but nothing unexpected. I did upgrade my equipment since the last time I used Xbox Game Pass, so overall it worked a lot better. I think it was just old hardware, speed and latency. I still have a slower upload speed, so I think, and I still don't have the symmetrical internet speeds that I would like, but which I think is the other main issue. But as far as the equipment goes, that resolved a lot of it because I didn't get as much stuttering and hiccups or anything like that I usually do, or I did before, so that was a definite plus on the back end. But as far as the game goes, overall it kind of feels like it tried to match what they did in the first game. It started off on Coruscant in an Imperial facility, whereas the first game started off at an Imperial shipyard. So from there, the similarities kind of diverge a little bit. We don't have as many planets as we do in my favorite Star Wars game, Knights of the Old Republic, but we spend a lot of time going back and forth and exploring the same few planets, which is my main issue with the game, that it's no wonder, or it makes me wonder why the Empire didn't find them sooner, because they keep going back and forth to the same place. So why didn't the local Imperial remnants or facilities try to figure out why this same ship is going back and forth? Granted, they could be using some sort of concealing technology or something like that, but eventually someone's got to say, or even with all the Imperial forces that they meet while you're playing the game, someone's got, just by rules of chance, that someone's got to be able to escape and get a message off to the Imperial facility to say, hey, something's going on here, which I guess if it's in the backwaters, no one's really going to take the time to figure it out, but someone's got to, or because a Jedi or someone with a lightsaber is priority, you'd think that they'd send someone sooner than the last third of the game, when we do end up meeting with Vader again, which was kind of a bummer that they kind of kept with that, which eventually you kind of wonder who the revealing character is going to be for latter part of the game, but they didn't do as much of a reveal as they did in the first game, but you do end up as I forget the lady's name that you meet to guide you, but she fights against Vader. You end up beating him and moving on. So it kind of would have been a better reveal to have the Emperor show up, or have even a tie-in, like just a cutscene with him telling Vader to go attack or find out what's going on, or just have some sort of revelation with him. Even the same thing goes with, the Saw Gerrera stuff, that it was mostly a name drop, so why not have that, or a connection to Rogue One or the Obi-Wan franchise or something like that. But regardless, and needless to say, that all was fine, just to the point of, okay, well, by the end of the game, it does feel like they're setting up a third game to actually round out having Cal join up with the Path and meeting up with a potential Quinlan Vos, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and tying all the franchises together. So for me, I would kind of say this is kind of like a stepping stone game where they're trying to filter out the fallout from the first game and then lead us into a third game where you treat it as Fallen Order, Survivor, and Legacy, or make it like Star Wars Jedi Legacy, to have Cal meet up with the Path, and your goal is to guide people along the Path, and you meet up with different characters, and you have to somehow set up a story around that. And for me, that would not that this game was bad, but it would make the game that much better, because on the upside for this game, it did have very, very beautiful environments. You do continue along the same things that you did in the first game, as far as the grapple thing and the running along the walls and building up your abilities using your lightsaber points, force points, and all of that stuff. So if you have muscle memory from the first game, it's very easy to jump into this one. They don't change a whole lot as far as gameplay mechanics go, so you're very immersed in the story. Generally, it does work. You do meet up with Cordova, and you see that they're trying to rebuild the Jedi archives and all of that stuff. So they do introduce a lot of that stuff well. The visuals are very good. And like I said, the story kind of left me wanting a little bit, but it does feel like they're treating this as a stepping stone into the third game to connect it into the Star Wars universe as a whole, or connect it to the Path, and have Cal and the team set up their own waypoint. And that kind of would explain the thing that they have at the end of the game with Grief or whatever wanting to set up base on that planet, in the hopes of in the potential to make that a stopping point along the Path, that if anyone can make it to that point, then they can get to the next piece of the puzzle, or that's the starting point for the Path, because it's the easiest place to go, or something along those lines. So for me, overall, I do give the game a grade of, I'd say I give it about an A to A-. The story notwithstanding, it does feel like they're setting it up for an overarching trilogy of games, so we'll see what happens if and when they do have a third game in the series. So to move on to a game that I've never played before, I finally decided, because I was going on vacation and I saw that the gameplay time for the original Quake from 1996 was super short. I thought I would give it a shot to see how the game went, how long. If the first few levels turned out to be not too bad to get through, then I would play the game and use that as a way to have some content pushed out while I was on vacation. And it actually worked out perfectly, because I'll get to my thoughts on the game in a bit, but overall the gameplay was very smooth. It actually was super straightforward to get through. I did have trouble a few times randomly throughout the game as far as getting through levels, but if you've played any games of a similar type from the era or now, then getting into it is actually super straightforward. So if you've played Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, like I've been doing for the past few years, then jumping into this is not too bad. And if you've used source ports like GZ Doom and you've used the 3D look, then jumping into Quake is actually not that bad. It mostly would just feel like Doom mod with a different story, different weapons, and that sort of stuff. So jumping into it was pretty straightforward. Much like the original Doom for me personally, I do remember the first level generally well, but I don't remember actually getting through that initial level. So I do remember the opening scenes and then getting through certain parts of it, but never actually getting past that initial level because I remember nothing of the second level on. So I know I've never, or for me, I know I never finished the game, but I've never even got to the second level like I did in Doom. So I'm not sure why I never got through it, but playing it now playing it now in completion, I kind of see that for me, it was an okay of a game. I saw what they were trying to do was introduce a fully native 3D environment, but not have another Doom game. So they had already released Doom 2 by this point, so they wanted to introduce a native game using their new Quake engine. So they set up a new storyline. You're playing as the Ranger, and you're stopping an invasion on Earth, which is the weird part because it's basically a Doom story. So you do have new weapons, but you do have some very familiar weapons in the form of a shotgun, super shotgun, railgun, and all of that, but in a new themed way. You don't have a BFG 9000, but you have a lightning gun, and you also have a nail gun, which I thought was probably the better of the two weapons. But overall, that part was fine. They were trying to introduce some of the same stuff so you're familiar with, and not change that up too much. But you do have some new elements. So your zombies you can kill them, but they come back to life. You have Wampa-like creatures, or Yetis, basically. You have to beat this all new boss, which I hate the name, and I'm not going to say because I'm most likely going to say it wrong. So if you beat the level, then you know what I'm talking about, that Shub guy, which is basically just tentacles and lava water. So I'm not quite sure what that was all about, but they kind of made it a more medieval Gothic style environment across the levels, which I thought was pretty cool. So as far as that goes, it was fine. I think my biggest issue with the game were the enemies. They are faster moving, so that was interesting, but they're all more native 3D. They're more realized better in 3D, so they move better, but they look really silly doing it because it is the first version of 3D. So you have your ups and downs, but for the time it seems like it was well enough done to introduce this environment. But to the counter of that, for me, I actually would have preferred that Doom 2. So what Doom 2 tried to do was they didn't want to change too much from Doom 1, but they were using the same engine, so they were able to do things like speed up the door movements, introduce a few new enemy types. I think it was like the Archvile and a couple of other bad guys, but as far as weapon goes, the only new weapon they introduced was the super shotgun. But it feels like if they had waited an extra year to develop a fully 3D system like they did in Quake, then they could have actually had a more truly 3D game and catapulted the Doom franchise forward that much more by having a fully 3D Doom game. Introduce do what they did by keeping this, just introducing the super shotgun, the few new characters that they did, and keep everything else the games, keep the levels the same, the story the same, but make it fully 3D realized, and it would have made it that much better. Or because some of the team members were the same, there was just a lot of big backstory and history for that. But rather than make the Doom 3 game that they did, make a Doom 3 game in the Quake engine, make it fully 3D realized, use the same Doom style and aesthetics and visuals and all that, and make a story that continues the Doom guy's story, and make it in the Quake engine, and then move on from there and leave it as is and all that. But it would have made for an interesting backstory or interesting story to move Doom into the fully 3D world using the Quake engine, but taking away from the actual game. So for Quake 1 though, I don't know. I think for me, it's not really my type. I was thinking I'd try Quake 2, but it feels like it's more along the lines of Quake 1. So between Doom and Quake, I do prefer the Doom franchise. I think for me, in retrospect, all these years later, I think the main reason why I didn't finish Quake 1 to begin with was I didn't really like the visual styles to begin with. Not that I wasn't ready for it, because I wasn't ready for Doom either, but jumping into Doom, I actually kind of prefer the aesthetics and visuals of that more than I did with Quake. The visuals overall, though, for Quake felt like they were a step backwards. It feels like the Doom visuals are actually a lot more solid, but when you think about it, Quake was more in the 3D environment, so they probably had to, even though it probably required more system resources, in retrospect, the visuals feel like they're a step backwards because the enemies look more, even though they're 3D, they look ridiculous. They're like silly moving, not like ridiculous in a bad way, but like silly moving. The speed is kind of all over the place for some of them. We're not ready for things like those blob things that come at you and explode. Even though you have things like that in Doom via the, and I'm drawing a blank on the flaming skeleton things. And then even the brown ones that shoot out the flying skeletons and all that. I mean, it feels like the visuals in Doom were a little bit better as far as things like that go. So I think that's why I generally preferred the Doom franchise over the Quake one, or the Quake franchise. So it's not to say that Quake is bad. Each side has its own people who vouch for them. It's not that Quake is terrible. Just I think the themes of it and the visuals in the games and all that were more for a different audience than what I prefer. So to that end, at the moment, my next gameplay is actually going to be a replay of Doom. But what if the game was properly done in 3D? Or what if they had rebuilt Doom on the Quake engine so it was actually 3D-ify, the graphics were a little bit better, and all of that. So that's actually what it feels like the project over at Voxel Doom is trying to do. So Voxel Doom does feel like they're taking all of the elements and making them truly 3D. So rather than like when you're going around the blood pits or like dead entities on the ground that follow you as you move, you can actually properly go around them in 3D and explore them in a 3D space. Weapons actually move or rotate in 3D. Armor moves around in 3D. The sprites for the various enemies are upscaled a bit, so they move in a proper 360 degree circle versus what I guess and I've been watching a few videos to get ready for this gameplay, but I guess the original Doom moved enemies in a 45 degree arc, so it looks a little bit more choppy when you look at it in retrospect. So Voxel Doom makes it so that they move in a proper circle, so their actions are that much more smooth. So I'm gonna give Doom 1 another replay just to see how that goes, and even hopefully get as far as the later chapters and check out how the enemies like the Cyber Demon and the Spider Mastermind look, see if they have better movements or more smoother movements, see how they look in a proper 3D environment and things like that. I did test it out to make sure it works, so I will be playing that much like my prior Doom gameplays via GZ Doom on Delta Touch, and do a proper compare and contrast there. But so overall, Quake 1 was not a terrible game. I made it through without having to use God mode, which is for me, it was a success because while I did die a few times, and a few times it did take a few times to get through those levels and enemies and things like that, and a lot of exploration and reloading save states and things like that. For me, that's, it's there for that reason, to have save states, so I was able to make it through and play the game. There was one level where I was almost out of ammo and I had to beat those blue exploding blob things. So I did use the cheat code to get all weapons and ammo. So I could use the, I think, lightning gun and nail gun and all of that to clear them out, because there was a whole bunch of them, and all I had was a shotgun. Me and my noob aim and all that, I was having way too much trouble getting through it, so I did that, so I was able to get through that and beat the level. But other than that, the rest of the game was played as is, as I got the weapons and beat the levels and explored and all that. So overall, I'd give the game of about a B+ to A-. The 3D, while in retrospect seems a bit silly, I could see it's a good succession to like Doom and Doom 2 as far as what they were trying to do. The story was decent enough. You're trying to get through this medieval style level to find the runes, to find out where the source of this invasion and defeat the enemy. So you do have this portal that you go through to get through the different. So you pick your difficulty, and then you go through different doors to continue each level. They want you to go in order, so it's progressing difficulty. For me, the first 3 levels felt kind of on par as far as difficulty goes, and then the 4th one was ridiculously hard for some reason. But that aside, it was fun enough. I did like the theming of the levels as far as the medieval goth style goes. Story was okay. I mean, for me, it felt just they took the Doom story and changed the names. So instead of Doom Guy, you're the Ranger. Instead of that Shub character at the end, you have the Spider Mastermind or the Icon of Sin from the Doom games. Instead of the BFG 9000, you have the lightning gun. Instead of the plasma gun, you have the nail gun. So things like that. There's very similar comparisons. So they didn't change up too much aside from the look and feel and the themes and some of that stuff, and kept the rest the same. So that's kind of why I wish like a Doom 2, or there would have been a Doom 3 and then Quake engine to give us a Doom Guy story in a 3D environment before we actually got the Doom 3 game as a stepping stone into the Doom franchise reboot. Or it would have paved the way for the Doom franchise reboot to do what it needed to do, or present a backstory game for Doom 3 via Doom 3, and then have the reboot to present all the new stuff they wanted to do with the franchise. So that, with that being said, like I mentioned, the next gameplay, it will be Doom via the Voxel Doom mod. So I haven't started that yet, but when I do, I'll start putting that up on the YouTube channel as always. So to round out this particular episode, the vacation trip that I went on was the 11-day kaleidoscope tour of Iceland. Totally random tour. I had never been to the country, wanted to visit it. August is actually a pretty good time to visit as far as the weather goes. July is a good time as well. So if you want good weather for the most part, be able to visit most places without issue, then July to August is a good time to go, as far as not too cold of weather, but not too hot either. I mean, the highs were in the 50s and 60s and low 60s for the most part, with sun and mostly clear sky, so it worked out nicely. A couple of days it did rain, but it's Iceland, it's not unexpected. So as long as you have a raincoat with a hood and or an umbrella, then you're pretty much good to go. So overall, it was a good trip. Went to a lot of different places. So visited the city of Reykjavik, saw the waterfall of the gods, saw a stone collection, saw a number of other related smaller waterfalls as well, but got to see the waterfall of the gods as well. Saw a lot of lava rock formations and things like that as well. So one of the main, or a couple of the main things that I did learn, or the basic research I did, was a couple of the Game of Thrones shots were taken in Iceland for the stuff that was north of the wall. So I did get to see, so the Waterfall of the Gods was a filming location. Got to see one of the mountains that was, or the inspiration for Arrowhead Mountain, when in, I think, season 7, when the crew has to bring a White Walker back to King's Landing. So got to see that. Also got to see one of the black sand beaches that was the inspiration behind Dragonstone. So I thought that was pretty cool. So All in all, a good trip. So while not a lot of the Game of Thrones locations were in Iceland, seeing a couple of them in life was very nice. So definitely worth recommending it. Also had a chance to see the Blue Lagoon. It was very beautiful, clean water, so that was nice. Saw some of the blue basalt, or not the blue, but some of the basalt columns that are there, so that was very nice. Towards the end of the tour, also got to visit one of their national parks, which was I think a filming location and also the inspiration for some of the, I think, season 4 or 5 stuff, when the Hound is trying to take Arya back to her family and they're on their little trip. So when you visit the national park, you'll see that it looks very much like those filming locations that you see as they're going through those mountainous areas. There was also a lava field that we saw, which our guide told us was the inspiration for Mordor from Lord of the Rings films and the stories and all that. So I thought that was pretty nifty. I mean, true or not, you could kind of see that what they were talking about, a lot of the rocks and formations were very Mordor-ish, so you have a lot of trees and stuff, which you could kind of see that as part of the things that they were tearing down when the orcs are setting up the army and all the factories for Sauron and all that stuff. So that was a very cool thing to see as well. So overall, it was a fun trip. All the stuff I did was all the photos and videos I took were on my OnePlus 13. For the most part, the videos I took, and I'll have a link in the show notes to the photo gallery and the YouTube videos. So most of them the videos were taken in 4K at 60 frames per second. In one location, I did want to take videos using the 8K 30 frame or 8K 30 FPS mode on my phone, because apparently I guess the 8K takes in more resolution or takes in more details, but doesn't have the smoothness of the 60 FPS. But the problem in that area turned out to be that because it's still summertime, there's still a lot of bugs in that lake area, so you spend a lot of time swatting bugs as you're trying to take videos. So parts of those videos came out as expected, but the rest of them are not, because the phone becomes shaky as you're trying to take videos and swat bugs away. So the picture is actually better than the video, but you'll kind of try to see. I did kind of more or less capture the reflection of the water in the lake with the clouds and mountains above it as a good reflection, because the water was very still. The reflections were very, very nice, so it does feel like you're walking high in the sky with the reflections of the water underneath. So it was a very beautiful area, but it feels like it would have been better visited during the maybe in like September or October, in the later months, as it starts to cool down a little bit, when there's less bugs or they're out of season. So there is that. The main downside that happened, though, is that while it was kind of early to see the Northern Lights, there were a couple of times when it was possible to see them, or they did happen, but it was very cloudy and overcast. So if you do want to see the Northern Lights, I do recommend going in later months, like in September or October, versus July or August, because there's still a lot of daylight. Even when we went, sunset was around 10:30 or 11, but it was still light out even after the sunset, and then the sunrise was around 4:30 to 5. So there's still a lot of sunlight, and you have to be awake at a very specific time to potentially even see the Northern Lights, and it has to be a clear sky. So for us, during the day, for the most part, it was partly sunny or fully clear skies, but by the time it got to evening, the clouds did roll in, so it was hard to get a view of the Northern Lights. So you'll see that even in the time lapse that I took that video around like 10:30 or so in the evening, and you can still see it's almost like it was still like pre-sunset. So that was a kind of bummer, but it does leave it open to go check out the Northern Lights on another vacation. But this was actually all in all a good trip, because we lucked out with good weather. You'll see in a lot of the pictures that there was, for the most part, clear skies or partly cloudy, so it wasn't too hot, it wasn't too cold. It did rain a couple of times, but we had our jackets with us, so it worked out nicely. So overall, it's a good trip. So I recommend, if you want a trip where you're not worried about the cold too much, go in the summer, like June to August. But if you want to see the northern lights, go in the latter part of the year, like October to January. But you are going to get a higher chance of things like bad weather, like rain and stuff like that. But your chances of seeing the northern lights does improve. So, needless to say, it was a good vacation. I had a good time. It was very relaxing to have a couple of weeks off. The tour that I was a part of, they provided meals, a lot of the meals, so we had some really good food. I recommend skyr. That's the Icelandic yogurt, which is, I guess, technically cheese, but it's a very light yogurt. So mixing that in with granola makes it taste very, very good. So there's that. Had some local coffee a couple of times, so I enjoyed that. The Glacial Lagoon is definitely a good place to visit. It was very clear, so we got good reflections of the glacier pieces that were in the lake there. So definitely recommend visiting Iceland if you ever get the opportunity. And overall, it is a good time, not only to visit the country, but to get a good piece of their history and food and culture and all of that stuff. So if you can do the nature and northern lights on one trip, then it's good. But if you want to split it up into two, so have good weather to learn about the history and culture in one trip and the northern lights in another, that is also a good way to go as well. One of the things I almost forgot to mention is we did visit one area that's not quite Skellig Michael, which was a filming location from Star Wars The Last Jedi, for the Luke Skywalker Rey training scenes and all that for Octo. But we did visit one of the hill beach areas that is very much it feels like a piece of Skellig Michael. So it's actually almost directly in that one line. So if you look on a map at that particular area and do a line to Skellig Michael on the way to Ireland, it's almost directly on one line, so you can see kind of how it's very similar areas to look at. It was on the area past the area where we saw the inspiration behind Dragonstone, but you can see how this particular beach area was very much Octo, or like a inspiration, and then they went to the island for the filming, to the point where we were at this location we were able to actually catch a glimpse of puffins. So they did tell us that the puffins were not in season, meaning that they hadn't returned to this particular area. So if we saw any, we would be lucky, and we actually did see a couple. So one of the videos in the playlist is the video. I had to do a super zoom in shot because we saw one, it's hiding in its hole, it does flap its wings and turn its head and all of that stuff. But we were lucky to be able to see the puffin, to the point where it does very much feel like the inspiration behind the porgs. So I thought that was a pretty nifty thing to see as well. But all in all, good trip, had fun, definitely recommend it if you ever have a chance to go. In one trip would probably be the nicest thing, but if you want a beautiful trip for the scenery in one trip and then the northern lights in a separate trip, then that also works to get the best of both worlds for the country. You can go on your own probably if you know what you want to look for, but I do recommend going on a tour. The 9-day tour you could probably do like an 8 or 9-day tour, but it would kind of feel rushed and you might miss some stuff. And then the 13-day tour might seem a bit long, but you do get more stopping points of places to visit. We only did the 11-day tour, and I thought that was enough. We did get to see some of the things that we wanted to, a lot of the things we wanted to see, so it worked out nicely. So all in all, a good trip. Recommend going. Iceland is a very beautiful country, very good culture and history and all of that stuff. We had a good tour guide who explained a lot of the history and all the locations we were at and all of that stuff. So we got a good backstory along the way. He was a very fun guy, so kept us entertained throughout the whole trip. But with that being said, that is actually all for this particular episode. So if you have any questions, comments, feedback, or anything like that, you can comment on the post on any of the social media sites I'm on. All of them are linked on the website at HeadphonesNeil.reviews. The YouTube channel is youtube.com/PatelN01 for the audio version of the podcast, gameplay videos, and all of that stuff. So I didn't have a chance to do it before my vacation, but I will update the website to promote the Jedi Survivor and Quake 1 gameplays until I have a chance to start playing Voxel Doom, which at the moment will be the next gameplay. I have all of that ready to go, but like I said, the YouTube channel is youtube.com/PatelN01 for gameplay videos, audio version of the podcast, all of that stuff. It's also all linked on the website at HeadphonesNeil.reviews for past episodes, subscription links, and all of that good stuff. And then, of course, by becoming a member on the YouTube channel, you get early access to content. So as gameplay videos are posted, you get immediate access to that by being a member. So, and it definitely helps support me as a content creator. But that is all for this particular episode. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time.